Hello, all you happy people. Welcome to Stick to Shorts, a classic cartoons podcast. It's all about the animated short subjects from Warner Brothers, Disney, MGM, and more that played in cinemas in Hollywood's golden age. That makes this, technically, a movie review podcast. So if you know what movie review podcasts are like, this is that. What's neat about this one is that the movies are only approximately 7 minutes long, and they're also cartoons. My name is JD Hansel, and I'm a writer for the Muppet fan site toughpigs.com. Lately, I've been really into classic cartoon shorts, so I made this podcast to give me an excuse to learn more about them and chat about them with friends. This first season of probably about 8 episodes is sort of a pilot season. I'm figuring out if I can even do this show, but I'm also sort of giving you the gist of the major classic cartoon studios and creators. It's a sampling, if you will, of the different sorts of cartoons you'll find as you get into this topic and the different ways those cartoons can be approached for a podcast. Most of these cartoons are the major super famous ones, like today's cartoon, and others are a little more surprising, but are ultimately useful cartoons for introducing the ideas that I'd like you to keep in mind as we cover other cartoons that you might know and remember even better. This week, we're getting our first proper look at the Disney studio. I talked about Disney in the introductory episode in the context of the Warner/Schlesinger directors like Tex Avery and Bob Clampett actively rebelling against the standards and practices of the Disney studio, at least to a degree. They were taking things from Disney too, actually, so it's a complicated thing, but more on that another time. For now, I think it only makes sense that I show you a Disney cartoon before we go any further, as most of the cartoons we'll talk about on this show will be in conversation with Disney in one way or another, even when they're not produced by Disney and even when they don't want to be associated with Disney. This week's cartoon is sort of the best and worst example of Disney at the same time. I'm not saying it's a bad cartoon at all. What I mean is it's kind of a bad example of Disney cartoons for the purposes of introducing you to the studio, in that it uses the studio's star very differently from the way he had been featured before, but it's also a really appropriate and nifty introduction to the studio because of how it shows you both of the two main strands of the Disney DNA in the 1930s, fairy tale adaptations and star-driven comedies. It makes for a very nice mirror opposite of Warner Brothers' Porky and Wacky Land from the same year, so you can see these two different poles of the animation world at this time. Of course, it's going to get more complicated than that oversimplified binary very quickly, but nevertheless, when I talk about the Disney style on this show, I mean a lot of what you see in this cartoon. Serious attention to detail, very skilled artistic craft, noticeably big budgets, and Walt's own version of realism, all in the service of making you understand and believe in the characters. To follow along with this exploration of classic cartoons, be sure to follow @StickToShorts on Facebook or Blue Sky, where you'll find guides to what's coming up soon on the podcast that include content warnings, so you know what you're getting yourself into, and home video availability information for the cartoons, so you can more easily follow along. Of course, if you do not wish to support big American companies right now, keep in mind that a lot of these shorts are just kind of around. They're around. Do as you will. With housekeeping out of the way, I think it's time to talk about Disney cartoons and Mickey Mouse. Naturally, I've brought along a friend to talk about them with me. Joining me for this really necessary trip through Toontown is a phenomenal artist and my pal, Christy O. Hiya, Christy.
Hi! Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. What do you think people would know you for best? Because what pops to mind immediately is the Muppet Princess Bride.
Yeah, I think that is definitely my current claim to fame on the internet, which is funny because for much longer I've also been making Labyrinth prop replicas.
That is, as much as I love the Muppets and as much as I love the Princess Bride and as much as I love what you've done there, the Labyrinth props are what absolutely blow my mind.
Oh, thank you.
Really, what you've done is amazing, and I am always just kind of baffled whenever I see your work. It's really cool.
Baffled in a good way, hopefully.
In a very, very good way. Now, Christy, I have a big question for you, and you can approach it however you'd like to. What is your history with Disney? That's way too big a question. If you just want to focus on animation, on cartoons, or however you want to, whatever comes to mind.
All good. For a while, I wanted to become a Disney animator or work in the animation industry, so that was like a major influence for what got me into not just Disney, but made me pay more attention to animation in general and learn some of the history.
I did not know this about you. Is that what got you into drawing and other kinds of art? It
Oh,
started
yeah.
with a dream of wanting to be a Disney animator?
Yes, 100%.
And then I guess, is that what led you to take the animation history course?
Yeah, pretty much. As mentioned, loved Disney, loved consuming the Disney media,
Hmm.
especially as a 90s kid. In Canada, one of my go-to channels was Channel 39, otherwise known as the Family Channel. Because in the 90s, there wasn't a dedicated Disney channel up in Canada. The Family Channel was affiliated with Disney, and so they played a lot of Disney shows. I also remember being an avid watcher of Disney's One Saturday Morning. So, a lot of the mostly newer shows on that particular block. And adding to that, back in the 90s, my grandparents had satellite TV, which meant that every time I got to visit them, I got to see the legitimate Disney Channel.
Okay.
So altogether, I was consuming a lot of Disney media as a kid. And while the majority of that were, again, the newer Disney shows, there were a few programs that would play some of the classics. I
Hmm.
think the show Mickey's Mouse Tracks was probably the biggest source of my exposure to the classic shorts.
I've never. Wait, maybe I have. I think another friend mentioned this to me recently, but what is that?
Basically, just a compilation show. Looney Tunes did something similar where they would just have a 25-minute programming block that they would show
Hmm.
assortment of the classic cartoons.
Right.
And eventually, I think the main tipping point for me just loving animation in general, I could probably pinpoint it as being Disney's Tarzan, and particularly the work of Glenn Keane,
Hmm.
because that was right around the point that I think I started to have a comprehension that adults were the ones making cartoons.
Hmm.
And that was a job that maybe I could have one day.
Yes.
So yeah, for many years of my life, my hobby was drawing, and I was very focused on trying to get better about drawing, all self-taught, which was a struggle sometimes in the 90s and early 2000s, trying
Yeah,
to find,
I imagine.
that led me to trying to focus on getting that career in animation. I ended up taking a history of animation class in university, which I enjoyed immensely. And as it kind of transpired, I eventually realized that while I have a great love in my heart for all things animation,
Hmm.
I was not cut out to be someone in the animation industry. I have a friend right now who is in the animation industry, and she is made of sterner stuff than I, because it is a very thankless job, very high stress job,
Yeah.
a lot of overtime. And that was ultimately, I just had the realization, I don't want that for myself.
Right.
I like being able to draw what I want to draw, make what I want to make, use
Hmm.
my creative juices for myself and not to try and get a paycheck. So I kind of gave up the dream of becoming a Disney animator, but I'm happier for it.
You know, as a former film studies student turned not filmmaker, but much happier in most respects than I was when I was trying to be a filmmaker, I relate. I relate
Yeah.
very much. It's a struggle knowing your not necessarily knowing your limitations, but then figuring out how are you going to readjust your expectations to what you need and what you actually enjoy.
Hmm.
That's because what you imagine you'll enjoy and what you actually enjoy can often be very different things.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you then found the rest of the history of animation and came to really appreciate it. And we will, in future episodes, I hope, get to talk about, other parts of animation history and the rest of the cartoon world. But for now, I think we should turn to the cartoon at hand. This week's trip through Toontown takes us to 1938. The studio is Disney, the credited director is Bill Roberts, the uncredited director is Burt Gillette, and the cartoon is Brave Little Tailor.
Brave Tailor, I appoint you Royal High Killer of the Giant.
Giant?
In this cartoon, a medieval king sends a humble tailor to kill a giant, and that tailor is played by your friend and mine, Mickey Mouse. Christy, you and I both recently watched the documentary Mickey, the Story of a Mouse, and I was wondering, what's your opinion of Mickey Mouse these days? What do we make of that guy?
You know what? Had you asked me this before I watched that documentary, I probably would have given you a much different answer, because I think nowadays it's very hard to separate Mickey Mouse from the rest of Disney, you know, the mega corporation that we've come to kind of villainize. And it was almost strange in a way watching that documentary and being reminded of Mickey's humble beginnings and seeing it in the context of the time and some of the historical footage of Mickey around the world. I honestly, I think I came away from that documentary with a bit more respect for Mickey's humble beginnings. You know, yes, he has become maybe perhaps far too successful, but
maybe
I guess he's earned it, you know?
Well, he certainly was a victim of his own success in some sense, in that in his earliest cartoons, he had so much freedom to do whatever was funny and entertaining, and then had this responsibility put upon him so early, within his first few years, that he would never shake off again for the rest of his, 90-some year existence? Yeah, getting closer and closer to 100 years of Mickey Mouse all the time, and he still has to be the squeaky clean, kid-friendly corporate symbol under most circumstances. It was a little different in the recent shorts that were quite funny, and the way they handled Mickey Mouse was often pretty shocking, I think, but like completely worth it, highly entertaining. I think what's interesting to me about Mickey, for the purposes of this podcast, is looking at Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny, as each of them could be considered the number one cartoon star. It's just that Bugs Bunny is the number one star of cartoons, in cartoons. Mickey Mouse is the number one star to come from cartoons, but then got so much bigger than his legacy in classic shorts, and I would say so much bigger than Bugs Bunny. I don't think it was always clear that Mickey was going to be bigger than Bugs Bunny, because for a while Bugs overtook him in popularity in the 1940s, but Mickey has become such an unavoidable symbol of everything good and bad.
Yeah.
And so I'm so interested then in trying to figure out, like, what do we make of the change from Mickey being the right cartoon star for the moment to have everyone, you know, in hysterics, it seems, in the in the end of the 1920s, early 1930s, to 12 years after his debut, Bugs Bunny debuts, is a very different kind of character. So much has changed in that 12-year period, and you get a completely different sensibility winning over audiences. And it takes a while, and a TV show, of all things, and arguably to a degree a theme park, to swing the balance back to Mickey's favor for the rest of time.
I wonder how much of it comes from the novelty of the technology that Disney was using, because of course, you know, much is made to do about Steamboat Willie, and being the first like sound synchronized cartoon. There's also the advent of Technicolor, and Disney, very, very shrewd, having the
exclusive deal.
Yes, exactly. The exclusivity to have the full 3-color Technicolor process.
Right.
And thereby forcing all of his competitors to use the inferior 2-color process. Just by that, it's like, well, the Disney cartoons are just they look better than everybody else's.
Their budgets were like twice as much or more than what Warner had. It's just, they had unbelievable budgets. They had as you said, the color. They were so quick to sound and to use sound in interesting ways. And for such a long time were the ones driving the medium forward as fast as they could, because the secret ingredient to the secret sauce at the Disney studio was Walt Disney and his particular perfectionism and the way that he could get all of his animators to keep trying to do something better and something better and something better. None of the other studios had anything quite like that, or anyone quite like that. There were other factors to their secret sauce as well, as you've pointed out. Like, just the fact that they storyboarded everything was a huge advantage.
I think Walt was also very good at knowing which people to hire.
Yeah.
The team that he was able to assemble and also motivate, like he said, that propelled Disney to just a level of quality that the other studios, it's so funny to look at some of what everybody else was doing at the time and just the leaps and bounds that Disney started to make just by the people that they were hiring. And they were these young 19, early 20-year-old animators who were just out of the level of talent back in those days. It makes me question why I ever thought I could get a job in the animation industry. When I look and see where I was at 19 compared to somebody like Freddie Moore, it's like, oh my goodness, I was delusional.
Well, let me again stress that from where I stand, you are a phenomenally talented artist.
Thank you.
I will also say that today's animators still look at some of Walt's early team and go, how did they do that?
Yeah.
Like, you've got Eric Goldberg, an undisputed master of animation, looking back at how many hundreds of drawings Ub Iwerks is said to have done in a day, and he can't believe that, and he's one of the best in the business now. Like, I think all of the best animators today still look back to these people who made these cartoons and go, how on earth did they do that? They didn't even have this cartoon to watch, and they still figured out how to make animation like this when it hadn't been done. It's unbelievable. For some context here, by the late 30s, Mickey was not quite as popular as he had been, and this cartoon, Brave Little Tailor, was one of many attempts to repopularize the character. It was heavily promoted. Jerry Beck writes, quote, "The Disney studio publicized Brave Little Tailor as a special cartoon, a virtual mini feature," end quote. Mickey had a very popular comic strip at the time, and when this film was released, the comic featured a continuing storyline about Mickey filming this short. It was like some sort of behind-the-scenes making-of story.
That's adorable.
That information is from the book The 50 Greatest Cartoons by Jerry Beck, in which this cartoon is ranked at number 26. In that book, Charles Solomon writes, "This high point in Mickey Mouse's long cinematic career stands out as a triumph of design and character animation." End quote. It was also nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Subject, and it lost to another Disney cartoon, Ferdinand the Bull. In the 30s, Disney was kind of the only real game in town, as far as the Academy Awards went. Like, those were just the Disney Award. That was the point. They wanted to give trophies to Walt Disney. But, cartoons like this, the technique is so good, you can't really deny it for the reasons cited there. The designs are incredible. The character animation is incredible, and we're gonna get into that. I also think this cartoon is a good example of the general politics of the classic cartoon short, by which I mean the small and meek character overcoming the big and strong character. It's a good example of what Mickey had become since the early 30s. Neil Gabler's Disney biography establishes this dichotomy between the two personalities that make up Mickey Mouse, Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks. Fairbanks played swashbucklers on screen, characters like Robin Hood and Zorro. Ub Iwerks, who, originally drew Mickey Mouse, as you know, was the one who saw Mickey as Fairbanks, this hero. And even though Iwerks was long gone from the Disney studio by this point, I think you can see his vision of the character as an adventurous hero is winning out more and more at this point. I think that's maybe because it was the avenue that was still available to Mickey. Like, he could at least be virtuous. There were other things that Mickey by this point couldn't really be without destabilizing what people expected from him, but he could be a hero, and so he becomes the Brave Little Tailor. Some other notes that are of interest here. This short, as you may have seen, is it's unrestored on Disney Plus. I still have a hard time figuring out exactly how I'm supposed to word problems pertaining to interlacing, because I barely understand how interlacing works. But basically, this is a digitized version of a videotape or TV broadcast. That's what they put on Disney Plus. And for a long time, TV broadcasts were not a series of images in the way we think of all moving images as a series of images. They were a series of half images that broke the picture up into horizontal lines and only showed half of those lines at a time, so it wouldn't have to deal with as much data. So you wouldn't be able to tell this if you were watching it on like an old TV, but once it gets turned into a video file on a computer, the missing lines become visible, and we see this interlacing residue. There are solutions to this problem. Imperfect ones, but it doesn't look to me like they tried these for this short. And also, they definitely have it remastered in HD, because I have it on the Blu-ray. I think it's been released on a couple of Blu-rays. I've got it on the Celebrating Mickey Blu-ray, and it looks great there. They just have the wrong file on Disney Plus.
Yeah, which especially bizarre considering how beloved this one is.
But I don't think Disney knows what to do with their classic cartoon library, and I don't think they care very much. This should embarrass them, and yet I don't think it ever will. No. Which is really sad.
And it's such a shame, because having these classic, like Disney Plus is such an ideal way to convey these cartoons to new audiences. You know, you don't have to cobble together your 25-minute show to put on the Disney Channel. Just throw them up there. Yeah. You know, and people will watch them. I've actually been watching a lot of these cartoons with my little nephew. And it's been so fun getting to see his reaction to some of these classic cartoons. You know, he has no idea how old they are. Sure. And they're still entertaining him all the same.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wish they respected these shorts more, but it's always sort of the problem, is just getting the companies to actually treat this old material with respect. And as I talked about in the first episode, just it's tricky to get them to think about what they're doing as archival in nature, because that's not their business model, or at least they don't think it is. But like when Disney Plus started, what I was excited about was the thought of, oh, all the old stuff will be there. You'll get to see all their old movies, the weird, the random, you know, they're going to have like Moon Pilot or whatever, right? And then that's not actually the service. We didn't get the streaming service with So Dear to My Heart. We got just another streaming service, or at least certainly it became that more and more and more until now Hulu is on Disney Plus. I don't know what that sentence I just said means. What does it mean that Hulu is on Disney Plus? How can you have a streaming service on another streaming service? I don't get it. I don't understand, Disney. You were supposed to have a restored Brave Little Tailor, and instead you have the Flintstones? Baffling. Let's talk about some of the people who made this cartoon. I have a hard time remembering who directed what Disney cartoons, because they're all Disney cartoons. Like, Walt Disney always feels like he's the author of the films that he produced. And that's largely because he was so heavily involved in making them, especially in the early years, and all the directors had to please Walt first and foremost. So in an effort to remember who some of the directors of these acclaimed shorts are, I'll share a little bit about Burt Gillette and Bill Roberts. There's a profile of Gillette by Devin Baxter on cartoonresearch.com that I found really valuable for this. I'll link to it in the show notes. Burt had worked for a bunch of different New York-based studios over the course of the silent era, perhaps most notably the Fleischer Studio, and got some directing experience under his belt. He ended up at Pat Sullivan's studio, which made the Felix the Cat cartoons. In 1929, Walt went to Sullivan's studio to hire noted Felix the Cat animator Otto Mesmer, but Mesmer turned down Walt's offer. Burt Gillette overheard their conversation and went out ahead of Walt to catch Walt as he was leaving and said, "I'm your man."
Oh,
that's the
great
quote that I have. So somehow that pitch worked, and Walt hired him as an animator. He took on more and more responsibility for the Mickey Mouse cartoons, and when Ub Iwerks left in 1930, Gillette was officially bumped up to director. He would go on to direct the first 2 winners of the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Subject, Flowers and Trees, and The 3 Little Pigs, as well as 2 other nominees, Mickey's Orphans, and of course, Brave Little Tailor. His approach to directing was to act everything out, like becoming quite an expressive cartoon character himself, and he would time the performance precisely with the composer of the score. This cartoon was made after Bert left the Disney studio for a bit in the 30s and eventually came back. What happened in between is an interesting story. He was put in charge of the now very obscure Van Buren studio in New York and tried to force West Coast animation practices onto their longtime New York animators. It went very badly. He was something of a dictator and fired dozens of people. Ultimately, Van Buren's distributor, RKO, became the distributor of Disney cartoons, so Van Buren shut down. During that time, there's a story about how Walt reacted to Bert's departure that I'll try to remember to share in another episode. It's very funny. For whatever reason, despite the bad blood he had with Disney and some of the staff, he was able to supervise shorts for Disney again for a while. He directed a very small number of shorts before he resigned and or was fired. I'm still a little unclear on that part. But among those few remaining Disney shorts was Lonesome Ghosts. He likely would have received a directing credit for this cartoon, but he actually left before this cartoon had been finished. Enter Bill Roberts. While Burt Gillette's career as a Disney director was at an end, Bill Roberts began his directing career with finishing this cartoon. I was struggling for a while to figure out what his story was from what sources I had. In fact, at the time of this recording, I don't think he even has a Wikipedia page. This motivated me to pick up a copy of Don Pearl and Pete Docter's book, Directing at Disney, which came out just a few months ago. It turns out, when they began their research for this book, neither of them really knew who he was. When they asked noted Disney historian and all-around animation history expert Michael Barrier about Bill Roberts, he said,
"Yeah, he's a mystery man.
Mystery.
That's one that is frustrating to me because I don't know much about him at all."
Just a specter that almost haunted the studio.
I know, some ghostly figure mysteriously showed up at Disney, directed a bunch of their best work, and then disappeared. So for the purposes of this podcast, I will simply tell you a little bit of what we think we know. He started at Disney in 1932 and was an animator on several shorts over the 5 years that followed, often relied upon to draw Pluto. That was his specialty. His approach to directing was very different from Gillette's. Disney director Wilfred Jackson said, quote, "Bill would rather figure a thing out than feel it out the way Bert would." End quote. Roberts went on to direct sequences in many of Disney's feature films, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, and more. Also, according to Michael Barrier's book Hollywood Cartoons, this is the production on which legendary animator Ollie Johnston was promoted from assistant to animator. The 50 Greatest Cartoons book credits about a dozen other animators who also worked on this film. It was a busy production. It seems like it was sort of an all-hands-on-deck thing. It was written by Jack Kinney, but there are 2 other creators who shaped this story pretty significantly, at least indirectly. The Brothers Grimm.
Yes.
This is a fairy tale cartoon, and that was sort of Disney's bread and butter in the 30s, to a large degree.
To the point that as with a lot of the other Disney adaptations of classic fairy tales, I kind of forgot that this was a Brothers Grimm story until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, you could easily forget that it's a Brothers Grimm story. And those 2 are really interesting in terms of their effect on Disney's work and Disney's reputation and Disney's effect on theirs. Because I think people will, like, if you mention that you're going to talk about a Disney adaptation of a fairy tale, then I think people naturally go, well, the Grimm original, it's pretty dark. It's pretty heavy, violent, gory stuff, isn't it? And Disney sanitized everything. And it's like, I mean, sort of. Sort of. It's complicated, though. So the Brothers Grimm were these academics, these professors who were collecting folk tales. Not technically the writers of those tales, although they would do some rewriting and change the stories quite a bit themselves from what they were collecting. And they were invested in this sort of nationalist project What I mean by that is, at that time, Germany had seen America have its revolution and was like, ooh, it would be nice to be a we the people that can say we should have authority here. We should, have a revolution and, the people should govern here. That would be good. Can we be a nation? And so the Brothers Grimm were collecting these folk tales in order to say that there was, in fact, a German culture. Like, that was very much part of the point, is to prove that there was shared culture making the Germans a people. And so that's why they gathered all of these tales that were not originally for kids, necessarily. Some of them were, but a lot of them were just what people told each other for entertainment. And then, of course, over time, they would evolve into children's stories. And some of that they did themselves. They published their own collection of stories that they edited to be fairly, relatively family-friendly for that time, which would still seem pretty dark today. But that includes this story. And then later, several other writers would be copying the Brothers Grimm stories, and then they would sanitize it a little bit. They would make changes. And so the process from a Brothers Grimm original, which isn't really original to the Brothers Grimm, to a squeaky clean Disney version is often really messy and convoluted and has several steps of changing the story and making the story more kid-friendly along the way before it gets to Disney. So that's my boring rant that I wanted to make sure I got in about the Brothers Grimm before we went any further, so that none of those Grimm fans could call me out on how I talk about this. And in fact, if we've got time, at the end of this episode, if we're feeling up for it, I might go through what happens in the Grimm version of the fairy tale, which is totally different. I've got a copy of it that I can read through if you're interested.
I love looking at different adaptations of the same story. It's so much fun to compare and contrast, see what one person thought was worth keeping and what another person decided, no, we got to do things different.
Yeah.
I have about 20 different versions of Phantom of the Opera, so I am all on board for you taking me through the Brothers Grimm story.
Wonderful. Yeah, what's interesting about this adaptation is how stripped down it is. Like, what Walt did was really cut down the story to its simplest possible form. And I think I heard or read somewhere that the other makers of this cartoon, like the animators, anyone involved in its in the creative side, particularly the writer, I think kept trying to add to the story to fill it out, to flesh it out, and whatever they tried to add to fill it in, Walt would pull off the storyboard or whatever. Walt was very actively cutting this down to just what was needed. So let's go through what happens in the cartoon and see what Walt deemed was worthy of keeping in the story of Brave Little Tailor.
Say, did you ever kill a giant?
I killed 7 with 1 blow!
7.
We open with the villagers panicking about what they're going to do about the giant at large. Haha. We see this wanted poster that is really striking because it at first I'm like, does the wanted poster need to be that big? Does it need to be actual size? But then it's like, how else do you convey the size of the giant? I guess it has to be as big as a building.
I love that so much. Just picturing these little medieval peasant people having to make this giant size poster. Yeah.
Probably still an easier art project than making a cartoon short in the 1930s.
Yes.
But yeah, I like how, because the poster is a drawn and painted medium and the cartoon is a drawn and painted medium, it looks exactly like the real thing and like it could move. I think that's really compelling. Around the corner from the crowd, a little tailor is working in his workshop. Is he a brave little tailor or just a regular little tailor? Let's find out. He's pestered by several flies buzzing around his head. As he swats them, they join together to sort of dive bomb him. He claps together 2 fly swatters and kills all 7 flies at once. Now, I'm not sure if that really counts as killing 7 flies with 1 blow. Seems more like 2 blows working synergistically to me. But he thinks he's killed 7 flies with 1 blow. The flies fall down with a sound effect that makes them sound much too heavy to be flies, and we hear a cymbal crash. This scene is the first taste we get of how Mickey moves in this cartoon, and it is beautifully fluid. Just gorgeous.
I was trying to look up, I don't know how familiar you are with the 12 principles of animation.
Okay. Naming exactly the thing that I was like, I'll have time tonight to refresh my memory on those before this podcast starts so that I'll be knowledgeable about those. Yeah, I'll just get out the book that I've got. And then I did not have time. So could you refresh my memory, please?
We could just speak about them generally.
Sure.
But these are basically just, as they are the principles of animation that Disney over the years developed. They are things like squash and stretch, anticipation, arcs, secondary action.
Right.
All of these elements that when combined give you this beautiful, fluid and clear and appealing animation that Disney was just the king of back in the day. I was trying to figure out, I couldn't get an exact date on this. When did they finalize what we now know as the 12 principles of animation? And I couldn't get a good answer to that, unfortunately. I do have with me The Illusion of Life, the book by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson.
Exactly the book that I intended to cram with before. It's here. It's right here with me.
Oh, and it's heavy.
It's such a heavy book. That's the thing that shocked me the most when I got it, is like, I'm so used to a nice big coffee table book like this not actually being this, like, as thick as a history book that is less tall and wide would be. This is big in every direction, and you feel the weight of it as much as you feel the weight of the giant in this cartoon. It's an incredibly dense book.
Yeah. I had hopes too as well to read this a bit more thoroughly before this episode, and then I cracked it open and I remembered, this is a lot of information.
Yep.
But yeah, again, at this point, I don't know how many of the 12 principles they had nailed down, but they had absolutely started to identify at least a few of them, probably squash and stretch being the chief one.
Yeah. I don't know if they had all the names for them at this point, but they had certainly figured out most of the principles by the mid-30s.
Yeah. And it's so fun seeing this animation because at this point in time, they're still kind of holding on to the pie-eyed, Steamboat Willie rubber hose-esque design of Mickey.
To a point, yeah.
Like he's definitely gotten a bit more detailed over the years, but he still has a lot of elements from Steamboat Willie. And it's funny because you can contrast it immediately with all of the other peasantry in this cartoon who have, kind of closer to Sorcerer's Apprentice. I think that was the first debut of, it's not quite modern Mickey, but it's closer to what we think of as modern Mickey, where he has the visible sclera in his eyes.
Right, yeah. So what's interesting is both this design and the Fantasia design come from the same person, animator Fred Moore. He was one of the animators most responsible for the Seven Dwarfs on Snow White. And he really pushed the studio out of the rubber hose style of animation and into this fluid style that you see here, that with like realistic counter movements. That was a Fred Moore thing for sure. He came into the studio right out of high school and immediately started drawing differently from everybody else. Ward Kimball said, and this quote is from, I think this quote is from that book, he decided to make Mickey's cheeks move with his mouth, which they had never done before because you drew everything inside the circle. He squashed and stretched him more and was right at the time, end quote. So Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston in that book wrote of the designs Moore drew for Mickey for Brave Little Tailor, quote, "On each picture, Fred kept improving Mickey's appearance. These were perhaps his finest for proportions, appeal, and personality," end quote. And then what's interesting is that Moore just kept redesigning Mickey, such that after Fantasia, you get the 40s Mickey in like the little whirlwind and stuff. And there, he's so stretchy. He's nearly a 40s Bob Clampett character. The elasticity just keeps going up, and the roundness and the cuteness, the squashiness, it just kind of keeps getting better. And here, in this cartoon, yes, in a way, it still looks like an older Mickey with the eyes and all that. He doesn't have the more expressive eyes that more would later develop for him. And yet, he's so expressive in a way that a Steamboat Willie Mickey or even a mid-30s Mickey could never be.
Yeah. Well, and that was Freddie Moore's. That was his main skill at Disney, or at least what you always hear people talk about with him, is appeal. How appealing his drawings were. He was the guy that you always went to when, you wanted, it was kind of stereotypical for the day, but when you wanted a pretty girl, a pretty girl design for your cartoon, you went to Freddie Moore, who would draw you the prettiest girl. I've
noticed you call him Freddie Moore, and I've been calling him Fred Moore. Did everyone at the studio call him Freddie?
So that might come from, I once had a drawing teacher who always referred to him as Freddie Moore. Okay. So I think that might be where it comes from. I did see a few mentions of him being called Freddie in The Illusion of Life. So, but that was, yeah. Well,
I think everyone in these studios was usually called some nickname, or at the very least by their first names.
Yeah.
Walt certainly wanted everyone to call him by his first name at the studio, which then translated into his public persona on TV. It, I think, created this illusion for people who came to the studio that everything at the Disney studio was so equal. Like everyone was on an equal footing, and Walt was just one of the guys. There's no hierarchy here, and it's so not true, because Walt was absolutely the king.
Yes.
In his domain. Like, people were leftist writers were going to the studio and reporting it's like a perfect workers' commune, and it's like, no, it's a monarchy. Everyone's just trying to please the king here. That is decidedly the system in place.
Although it is very interesting that someone like Freddie Moore, who, as you mentioned, he was like a fresh 19-year-old when he started to work for Disney, that this young man was given the reins to redesign Mickey Mouse. Like, what an incredible thing for somebody to get. It just speaks to, I guess, how much trust that they had for him.
Right, but also it seems like he did it because he couldn't stop himself. Like, that's sort of the impression that I got from reading about him, is like he just drew this way, in this way that was more elastic, and kind of felt that he had to do it, and then would very nervously show to Walt what he had done to Mickey. And as it happened, Walt would, for a while, for a number of these redesigns, go, hey, that's it. That's the way that Mickey should look from now on. And then everyone else had to follow Fred Moore's lead.
I wonder how many of the other animators were just cursing him out, with how long animation takes to have to redo your entire scene because this young upstart just impressed the boss with his incredible animation skills.
Right. Is that before they could just draw Mickey by tracing quarters and dimes.
Yeah.
And now they gotta figure out how to make him like a completely fluid and believable, expressive, full character.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. So in the cartoon, outside, one villager asks two other villagers, say, did you ever kill a giant? Mickey, who did not hear this, opens the window and yells, I killed 7 with 1 blow. I am not a fan of this trope. Not a fan of the trope where everything is built on a misheard word, and if people just spoke more specifically, then everything would be fine. It annoys me a little bit. You know what? This is from the 30s, and indeed basically how it is in the story from hundreds of years ago now. I guess I gotta let this slide. Here we get a wonderful montage of reaction shots as the rumor spreads. There's a baby that pops out of a stroller to yell in an adult man's voice.
Jiminy Crickets.
Makes me think of the baby in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh, Baby Herman, yes.
Yep. A man pops out of the old-timey equivalent of a utility hole that has a sign over it that says, Ye men at work, with like an E at the end of the word work to make it old and European, you see. These shots start getting really angular and dollying in and out, which makes for such a dramatic montage, and it's a ton of different characters with their own designs in totally different shots with totally different backgrounds. That's a lot of time and money.
Mm-hmm.
A lot
Yeah.
of time and money. Oh, it's such a good sequence, and it's so short. It's so good. Then we get a knight who's not an original design. That's just straight up Pluto. It's just Pluto, but now he's a knight and he talks.
They had to cut corners somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like this is where the character design budget ran out or something. I don't know, but this is what Bill Roberts could do very well. He was the Pluto guy. And so I imagine this is maybe where you see him stepping into the cartoon after Bert has departed. That is what I would guess. The knight comes sliding into the throne room and tells the king about the tailor. The king summons the tailor and unhelpfully asks if the tailor killed 7 with 1 blow. The tailor says, "Yes, Your Honor, and how?" with a wink and a gesture that we Muppet fans call a scooter fist. The king replies, "Well, how?" What follows is a performance from Mickey Mouse that doesn't explain much, but looks freaking phenomenal.
Yes. And at least according to Andreas Deja, who was a Disney animator, he worked on Scar, The Lion King, Gaston, Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
This was animated by Frank Thomas.
Okay.
And this scene, I love this so much. And I think this really highlights one of the big innovations in animation following the rubber hose era.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that characters could be shown to think, that they don't just mindlessly interact with the world around them.
Right.
Because Mickey has a thought process here. He's just here to talk about his feat of killing the flies. And meanwhile, the king has his own thought process, thinking that Mickey's talking about killing these 7 giants.
Yeah.
And you, the audience, are so naturally following that both of these separate thought processes are happening. You know, like, to be able to understand what's going on, you have to understand the misunderstanding that's happening between Mickey and the king,
Mm-hmm.
what both are thinking. And you don't for a moment question that these drawings are not just thinking, but are mistaken in their thinking.
Right.
And that's just, it's such a beautiful thing. And this is where I'll fully admit, I have a hard time watching the 1920s era of animation because compared to something like this, it's just so boring to see something like Bobby Bump puts a beanery on the bum. It's just this
obscure Fleischer polls coming out now. All right, great.
But it's just, you believe that Mickey is real in some way here.
Yeah, that is most of what is incredible about this scene. The fact that he 100% has a psychology that is the driving force of this scene. He has a mind, and you can kind of watch it turn as he moves. But also, on top of that, you know what helps? His poses are perfect. His expressions are perfect. His movements are perfect. Everything about his posture and the way his clothes sit on his body has just the right weight to it. Like, it's a version of realism or naturalism, but it's somehow better than reality. He's as lovable as can be, as you said, appeal. This is where the principle of appeal is dialed up to 100%. He you know what he is here? He's like, you just want to scoop him up and cuddle him. Never before has a cartoon character been so scoopable, where you feel like you could just pick him up and the clothes would just slide around in just the right way. It's incredible. Like, this is just a scene in which a character is explaining something that we have already seen. It should not be that interesting of a scene. And yet the animation here is so spectacular, gives such a tremendous performance, that it's, for me, the highlight of the cartoon. And I have watched it over and over again, and I am spellbound every time.
Oh, I'm right there with you. And just his enthusiasm over what, as we saw him defeat those flies. It was a very, very mundane thing.
Yeah.
But to Mickey, it was this grand adventure, and you believe it.
Yeah, and it's all very, very, very Walt to me, for someone to have a simple story that should not be remarkable and then give this somehow at once humble and arrogant, folksy performance of that story that over dramatizes it to the extreme, and you're just completely enraptured, and you're like, yeah, that is what happened. Thank you for telling this story to me. This is the most exciting thing. This is where you've got a ton of Walt and Mickey. I would also say this is where the way that Mickey moves is clearly so much of what makes Mickey appealing. Because like in that documentary that we mentioned before, Eric Goldberg talked about why he thinks Mickey is so popular. And he says simply, it's the way he moves. And he was thinking of other examples of Mickey. But for me, like, this is the cartoon that makes me believe, like, yeah, there are other things. It's like the fact that it's 3 circles is probably the thing that makes Mickey such an icon. But the way that he moves is what makes him a star.
Just magnetic, his performance.
So the king appoints Mickey the royal high killer of the giant, and after a beat, Mickey realizes what the king just said and falls to the ground. Mickey's reward will be 1 million golden pazuzas. I looked this up. That does not seem to be, to the best of my knowledge, a thing that exists. Not a great deal. Then Princess Minnie leans over and whispers in the king's ear, and the king gladly offers Minnie's hand in marriage. Minnie covers Mickey in kisses, which is enough to convince him. What do you think of the role of the Princess Minnie in this story? What is your take as someone who studies princesses in media?
I mean, Minnie is so adorable here. She doesn't get a lot of screen time, sadly, but I do really love that it's Minnie's idea that Mickey wins her hand.
Crucial to making this cartoon tolerable.
Yes.
Or else you'd certainly hate the king. You would be, at the very least, uncomfortable with Mickey accepting this deal, at minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it kind of has to come from Minnie.
Yes, yeah, and I know that they were not thinking at all about depicting a woman with romantic agency.
No.
They just wanted a cute little moment with Mickey and Minnie. But you know what? Regardless of their intentions, I just think it's very sweet that Minnie sees this dweeby little tailor and she's instantly swept off her feet by him.
Yeah, I mean, she also, like, is swept off her feet under false pretenses to a point, but you kind of believe that she likes him from the moment he walks into the room. I don't know. There's a connection between the two of them. And also, you see a little bit of the way that Minnie moves, and she's got some of the same, like, all the same principles are there. Now, how is that king, whatever species that is supposed to be, Minnie's father? That I don't know. That I don't understand. That I'm not going to think about.
Mm-hmm. It's a little like Prince John and Maid Marian in Robin Hood. You're not quite sure how they're related.
Yeah. So we get some more striking visuals as Mickey leaves the castle and the giant door abruptly shuts behind him. That, for me, is the memory of this cartoon that I have from whenever I saw it on TV as a kid. I didn't see a lot of Disney cartoons like this as a kid, but I think I caught a glimpse of this one once or twice, and I remember that moment when the door shuts and
mm-hmm.
he's isolated and yet also still has the attention of the crowd that is now looking over the gate at him.
Yeah.
You feel that. You feel that pressure. It just works as a story, I think.
Mickey is so relatable to me in this one.
Mm-hmm.
How this whole situation starts because he, again, was so excited about a mundane task he performed. And it leads to this awkward snowballing situation for him that he does not have the social skills to properly navigate his way out of.
Right.
And again, I feel like I've lived that so many times in my life where I get into a situation I did not intend, and now I'm in it and I do not know what to do. So I guess I just have to double down and follow through with what people expect of me.
Yeah, I think it is because I have been there in a way that I find the trope a little difficult to watch in media.
Yeah.
So Mickey sits on the countryside and says, gosh, I don't know how to catch a giant. And then the ground starts shaking. We see a giant who I guess is sometimes called Gustav, though is not named within this cartoon, I don't think. In a pretty dramatic, yet kind of funny sequence, he keeps almost crushing Mickey. And you really believe in the physics here. You feel the weight of everything.
Yes. And that's so important to this short, that the giant have this sense of mass to him. The giant was animated by Bill Tytla.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of known at the studio for being able to handle characters like this that needed to have this sense of mass and weight.
Right.
He also animated Stromboli, Chernobog, and I just love watching, it happens a little later in the short, but watching the giant's hands as they move in perspective, because they're drawn so much more realistically. I mean, there's still an element of stylization.
Right.
But when you, even like looking at the nail bed, the way the nail bed moves in perspective, and being able to have that immense grasp on anatomy and how real humans move is so important here to really sell not just like the giant, but I think the danger that Mickey's in as well.
Yeah.
You feel those footsteps. You feel, even when the giant is trying to swat Mickey, you believe that this is a, I don't know, 50-foot tall person doing this to this little tiny mouse.
Right. Or very possibly regular sized person, but in this cartoon, mice are actual mouse size. But we don't think about it that way because that's not how Mickey works. So for all intents and purposes, yes, completely like 50 feet tall or something like that, like truly enormous. What's interesting to me about Tytla as I was looking into him is that he has all this fame for his understanding of physicality in terms of the perspective and the weight and all the things you said, but then also has this reputation for being the guy who figured out ahead of the rest of the studio how to imbue the characters with real emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would not think of those as being necessarily the same skill set. And yet he like was putting all of this feeling into his work and into these characters that then everyone else had to try to emulate. Like, he was teaching the other animators, he was giving lectures to the other animators because of that interesting marriage of skills. And here's what I think is really interesting about that. I suspect that Tytla's combined talents there ended up being a big reason why the Disney studio saw the goal of giving characters more embodied emotion and the goal of giving characters more believable physicality as basically the same thing. Which, like, that's a very, very Disney, like, everything they were doing with the 12 principles, with the plausible impossible, or like all of those ideas that they're developing more and more over the course of the 30s are kind of operating under this assumption that if you can make a character more believable physically, you'll make them more believable psychologically, and vice versa. I mean, it would take the strike and its aftermath and everything that happens in the 40s and the movement towards modernism and all the animators who break away before finally you see people starting to think, actually, you can go all the way with stylization and leave a lot of physical reality behind and still have like characters that you believe in the feelings of, in a way, if that makes sense. And so I think in a way, a lot of it is probably because Tytla had that skill set. Like, I was reading in his lectures, he was emphasizing the need to just learn good drawing and be able to draw everything. That, like, people would come to him like, how do I draw Mickey and Donald well? Because I've been put on the Donald Duck cartoon, so how do I draw Donald right? And he's like, no, you need to learn how to draw right and to just understand how to capture the physical qualities of all things. And if you can do that and animate right, that's what you're going to need, because the stuff that we're doing right now, you may be on Donald right now, but Donald didn't exist 5 years ago, and 5 years from now we're going to be doing something totally different, and you got to be ready for that.
It's such a cliche. If you are a new artist, all you want to do is figure out a cool style, you know, something that's unique to you. This is how I draw these characters. And the very necessary but boring advice you get is you have to learn the fundamentals. You need to learn how to draw a normal, boring human being before you can start to figure out, like, how am I going to stylize? How, you know, you need to know the rules before you start to break them.
Even for me as a non-drawer, always painful to hear, because I feel like I have a lot more fun when I start breaking rules and don't always get to the point that I can figure out how to follow them. But you got a point, and that was very much Tytla's thing, and it pays off here because you get like just a realistic looking guy that is not in the same stylistic universe as Mickey at all, and yet that actually just makes the contrast more interesting. So we get some business here with the giant treating big things like small things. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to take note of here?
So it's specifically the part in this cartoon that probably would not be added were they to make it brand new today. It's rolling the haystack into a cigarette. And this stands out to me for a few different reasons. One of them being, I just really like when animated cartoons do something like this where a character makes something, because there's something very wonderful about picturing the scene of a real life animator creating a scene where their drawing creates something for themselves. It's just something really fun to ponder. But also, I just have a weird nostalgia for watching people roll their own cigarettes. Because I had an aunt who would do that, where she had a little kit and she had a big tub of tobacco. And when I was a kid, she would just sit at her kitchen table and she would roll her own cigarettes with this little machine. And for some reason, I thought that this looked like the most fun thing ever. And I would always ask her if I could try it. And she, very rightfully so, did not let the 9-year-old child roll the cigarettes for her.
Good. Great.
But now I'm like, I missed out on it. Like, it just seemed like a fun experience.
Well, find a haystack.
Yeah.
And some tarp over it. And then you roll up your own cigarette, and then a mouse will sneeze its way out of it. There's this incredible moment here when Mickey gets thrown into his mouth, holds onto the giant's uvula. Ooh, don't know how. That's a feeling. You feel that. And then Mickey then gets washed down with water. And like the water effect is weirdly believable and impressive for its day. And it seems like it should be way too hard for them to do at this time. And then the water effect is immediately followed by a lovely lighting effect from the flame. Like, I love the Looney Tunes, but they could never do this. Schlesinger could Termite Terrace could never.
No.
The effects here are incredible.
Well, and that was another thing that Disney was always really good at with their shorts, is that sometimes it was about experimenting with a new technique. Like, so much of the old mill was about testing the multiplane camera and just all the little special effects that they would go on to use for Snow White. Yeah. It's a very savvy way of, you're making a cartoon that you could sell to theaters, but you're also using it as a testing ground for some of your bigger, riskier pictures.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this is, of course, from around the time that they were making Snow White. Like, these were in production at the same time, even though this cartoon came out a bit later. Mickey seems to be really bothered by the smoke, despite the fact that he had a match in his pocket a second ago. So don't try to tell me Mickey doesn't smoke. We might not see it on screen, but you can't trick me.
Yeah.
Mickey sneezes and bursts out of the cigarette, resulting in a fight with the giant. He climbs onto the giant's nose and swings across his face on the hairs of his eyebrow. Also, feel that feels weird. He climbs up the giant's forehead and gets his foot stuck in the wrinkles.
Yeah, which that kind of, I don't know why, but that one weirded me out the most as an adult.
Yep, that's absolutely the most, I mean, it's supposedly the plausible impossible thing, right? Where, like, supposedly. But so plausible impossible, for the listeners, is this idea that in cartoons, you want to show a lot of fantastical and impossible things, but give them a kind of rationality that makes them acceptable. So here, could you actually get your foot stuck in the wrinkles in someone's forehead? I think not. However, they are creases, and so you can kind of understand the physicality of what's going on here and believe it. What I don't think they had considered is that I don't want to see it. And I don't know why I don't want to see it. I don't have any forehead-related trauma, but I don't want to see it. It looks wrong and bad.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I can't put my finger on it either. I don't know why I don't like it. I just don't, and I wish it didn't exist in this short.
Glad we're on the same page here. Very good. Very good. So he falls into the giant's hand, jabs the giant in the nose. Also, the consequences of it being such a physical short is that I feel that too. Like I remember that from as a kid. Like, oh, that looks like it looks like it's gonna burst or something.
As somebody who has dropped many a sewing pin onto the floor and proceeded to step on it, I know this pain pretty well. Not a fan.
No. Okay. Let's move on. When the giant claps his hands together to squash him, Mickey leaps into the sleeve. This leads the giant to stick his hand into the other sleeve, and Mickey starts to sew him up. He takes a rope and ties him up from head to toe, bringing the giant crashing down using only the tools of a humble tailor.
I just love that even though Mickey is in this life or death battle, he is executing those stitches so perfectly. Perfect technique, perfect, they're all the same, equal size and stitch length. He it doesn't matter, again, that this is life or death. He is putting his best quality into this work.
Right. And that's where you get to like the Disney morals of it all. Of like, so long as you're just very good at your job and committed to your work and always like doing good perfectionist labor, then you will be rewarded. No matter how humble your beginnings, no matter where you come from, then you will be rewarded and you can take on very big things, which is like appropriate for where Walt is at this point, where he just had the release of Snow White, took on this huge task that should have been impossible, going from little shorts to features. And with just the skill set that he kept on perfecting and the team that he kept driving to perfection from such humble beginnings in, Kansas City or whatever. Like, look at is that the right place? I think that's where I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah. Well, he started in Marceline, Missouri. But then he was I think it was the Kansas City Star where the animation fans are going to come after me. The Disney fans are going to come after me. I'm going to be in so much trouble. It's going to be so clear that I don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Podcast canceled.
Oh,
get out of here.
It's thematically appropriate, okay? You can read any Disney cartoon as the story of Walt Disney somehow if you try hard enough. You can. Trust me, you can do it. If people can read Disney as Snow White, as I've heard people do, then you can do it here. But that's about to get complicated, all right? I'm about to complicate and flip this narrative on you, okay? Dissolve 2, a whole darn amusement park built around the sleeping giant, powered by his snoring. We close with Mickey and Minnie kissing as the king rides up and down on a carousel horse, licking ice cream and yelling, "Yippee!" And as Walt Disney sat on the bench and watched the king ride the carousel, he said, "There should be a park where the whole family can have fun." And that's the end of the cartoon. So here's the thing. The fact that it closes with the king is really interesting. Because in earlier Mickey cartoons, it definitely would have closed on Mickey, and it's been Mickey's story this whole time. But then the point of the end is that the king got everything he wanted and is very happy in his own amusement park. And so I can't help but look at this as a noticeable shift in either how Walt understands himself or how the Disney studio understands itself, where it's identifying with a more powerful character here instead of the meek little guy, and thinks that that's the note that we should end on. The important thing is that the monarch in power is happy and delighted and licking strawberry ice cream. Like, I know part of why it ends there is sort of the joke of very dignified character and a strawberry ice cream cone as he's yelling yippee and gets to be a child again. But nevertheless, if your happy ending is, and then the king gets to be a child again, it's like, okay, something has happened to the Disney philosophy here that's very interesting and feels very telling of things to come.
I never thought of it like that, but yeah. So one thing about the ending that bugged me as a kid, and still kind of does it as an adult.
Okay.
And this is a bit of a journey, so you might have to stick with me here. I don't know if you're familiar with the tether cat principle, also called off-screen inertia.
No, I'm not.
So Gary Larson, creator of the Far Side comics, he once drew a comic that showed two dogs playing tetherball using a cat as the ball. And this comic apparently really riled people up, And Gary Larson hypothesized that it's because you never see the dog stop playing Tether Cat. That every time you turn to that page and you see that comic, they are still playing. And so given the lack of information, you have to assume that the cat never escapes the torment that they are experiencing. As a kid, it bugged me to see the giant tied up and I guess just seemingly forever asleep. Is this just the rest of his existence is being tied and used to power this theme park?
Yep, this is the question. This is the question. And I think that stood out to me when I was younger too, and still stands out to me now. Like, what's the plan here?
And I guess to tie it in, the king is happy, profiting off of the power of this sleeping giant who eternally has to sleep to sustain the king's joy?
That is... So the idea is like Mickey was supposed to slay a giant, and he didn't do that, and they can't show that. So I guess the best they can do is he's asleep, and then they have to turn that into a victorious ending. And so now the sleep has to be a source of power and joy in and of itself. But he presumably is not going to stay asleep forever. Like when he wakes up, you've invested a lot of money in building something that is really unsustainable.
Yeah. Well, and just the fact that they were able to build it, that didn't take 10 minutes that the giant was unconscious.
Right.
He must have been there for a long time. Have they been knocking him out? Is he comatose?
Right. Is he in a coma is the question. Yeah.
Who's caring for the giant in his coma?
Right. There are two possibilities for how we understand the ending of this cartoon. One is this is a highly unsustainable situation they've created, where in the brief window where the giant is asleep, they have built so much around him and it's about to go so terribly wrong. It would almost be like if you built your amusement park in a place that is subject to hurricanes and will almost certainly be underwater soon, like Florida. The other way that you can read it is that it's very sustainable because they're going to somehow keep the giant asleep forever. And that, like, either is dark, either is not a great ending, and yet nevertheless is the conclusion of one of the most acclaimed and beloved cartoons ever made.
Yeah, we have to come to this conclusion. There's no other information to lead us anywhere else.
Yeah, it's true. But it's also that thing where once you get to the end of a story and you are ready for it to end, the number of things that an audience is generally willing to accept goes way, like, it's, forget the plausible impossible. If it's a happy ending when we're ready for the story to wrap up, the audience will accept a lot. It's just that you also have to be careful about what that closing shot that you end on is, because that's often the taste that is left in people's mouths as they leave. That affects what they think of the whole thing. But I think because it's such a happy closing shot, people kind of leave in a good mood. I don't know. I've got an English translation of the Grimm's 1857 version of Brave Little Tailor, translated by Jack Zipes, who's quite the authority when it comes to fairy tale literature and translations of the Grimms. Like, he's kind of the Grimm's guy, from what I understand. The Jerry Beck of the Brothers Grimm, if you will. So I'm going to try to do this somewhat briefly, but basically here's my condensed-ish version of the story of the Brave Little Tailor. Once upon a time, there was a little tailor who killed 7 flies with 1 blow. That much stays basically the same. He gets very proud of himself and thinks the whole city should know of his accomplishment, so he decides to make a belt for himself that says 7 with 1 blow. But why just the city, he thinks? Why shouldn't the whole world know about it? So he decides to leave the city and show his belt to the world, and he ends up taking 2 things with him. A piece of old cheese and a live bird.
As you do.
I would say that makes more sense in context if I read the whole thing. Not much more. So very soon, the tailor meets a giant and invites the giant to join him on his journey into the wide world. The giant says, Hollywood! No, that's not true. That's the Muppet movie. The giant says, you crumb, you miserable creature. Just immediately hates the tailor. So the tailor directs the giant's attention to the words on his belt, which the giant thinks means he killed 7 men. So the giant tests the little tailor because he finds this kind of unbelievable. The giant squeezes a stone until it drips water and tells the tailor to do the same. The tailor does it with the piece of cheese, which tricks the giant into thinking he did that to a stone. I'm not sure how you get liquid out of a piece of cheese, but that is the logic of the fairy tale. So the giant throws a stone in the air until it's nearly out of sight. The tailor's supposed to do the same. The tailor pretends to do that and releases the bird, which just flies way up into the air. Now the giant has been tricked into thinking he can throw stones way out of sight. So the giant tells the tailor to help him carry an oak tree. The tailor says, "You take the trunk on your shoulder. I'll carry the branches and the twigs. After all, they're the heaviest." The giant buys this completely and ends up carrying the whole tree. Ultimately, the giant dares the tailor to spend the night in the cave where the giants sleep. The giant shows him to his bed, and later that night, smashes the bed with an iron bar to kill the tailor. What he did not know is that the tailor had decided the bed was too big for him and was sleeping over in the corner, so the tailor comes walking out of the cave in the morning, and the other giants run away scared because they think he must be super strong if he survived that blow, and will surely slay them. The tailor then journeys, forget everything that I've just said because it's not going to be relevant to the rest of the story. The tailor then journeys to the courtyard of a royal palace and stops to take a nap. And, that's how the tortoise beats him, because the tailor stops to take a nap. Some people come along, we don't know who, they read the belts, think he's a warrior, and go tell the king it would be a good idea to keep this guy around in case war broke out. So the king offers the tailor a military position. And the tailor says, "That's exactly why I've come here. I am prepared to enter the king's service." Well, the other warriors worry about that. They're thinking, if they have any conflict with him, he can just kill them all. So they all resign. And now the king wants this tailor gone because it just took away so much of his military. So he proposes that the tailor go kill 2 giants that have been ravaging the king's country. Different giants. As a reward, the king offers his daughter's hand in marriage and half the kingdom. The tailor also gets to take 100 knights with him as backup. I don't know how he thought this would get rid of the tailor if there are 100 knights involved.
Yeah,
but,
you're so afraid of the tailor, but you're going to give him half your kingdom and your daughter?
No, but only if he can kill the giants, and he's banking on the tailor getting killed by the giants. So the tailor says he can take care of the giants himself, and he actually has the knights wait outside the forest while he goes into the forest where the giants are alone to slay the giants. He finds them sleeping under some trees. He gets up in the trees and drops stones on one of the giants. So the first giant wakes up, shoves the other, and says, "Why are you hitting me?" "You're dreaming," says the second giant. I've decided that Jim Henson and Frank Oz are playing the giants. "You're dreaming," says the second giant. "I haven't been hitting you." They try to go back to sleep, and the tailor repeats this, so they fight again. He finally throws his largest stone with all his might right onto the first giant's chest. The giant jumps up and yells, "That does it!" Then they beat the crap out of each other until they're dead. The tailor stabs the giants a few times with a sword, so it looks like he killed them. Then the knights see this and totally fall for it. So the tailor demands his reward from the king, who is now full of regrets. The king hatches one more plan to get rid of him. "Before you can have my daughter and half the kingdom," says the king, "you must put your heroism on display again and perform one more deed. There's a unicorn running around and causing great damage in the forest, and I want you to capture it." This turned out to be quick and easy. When the unicorn charged at him, he jumped behind a tree, and the unicorn got its horn stuck in the tree. Then the king made him capture a boar. He trapped it inside a chapel. I don't know how to just the boar ran after him. He ran into a chapel, jumped out the window, shut the doors and the windows, and then it trapped the boar. Okay. So the king was true to his word. The tailor married the princess and became a king. And they all lived happily until the princess, now a queen, overheard the tailor talking in his sleep. I have just switched from being in present tense this whole time, I think, to being in past tense now. I apologize. I wrote my notes very strangely. So the princess is now a queen. The tailor is a king. She overhears the tailor talking in his sleep one night. And he's going, "Boy, finish that jerkin and mend the trousers fast, or else I'll give you a whack on your head with my yardstick." Like, what he's just muttered, I guess, gives away like his training as a tailor, because that's presumably what someone yelled at him. That's what I gather from that.
Yeah.
So now she knew that he was not the great warrior he had been made out to be, but in fact a simple tailor. So she told her father, and he said, "Leave the door of your bedroom open tonight. My servants shall be waiting outside, and when he's asleep, they'll go inside, tie him up, and take him aboard a ship that will carry him out into the wide world." She was on board with this plan, but the king's armor-bearer overheard the plot and, being fond of the tailor, informed the tailor of their plan. So that night, he went to bed with his wife at the usual time, and once she heard him sleeping, she got up, opened the door, and returned to bed. Okay. And then the brave little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, cried out, "Boy, finish that jerkin and mend the trousers fast, or else I'll give you a whack on your head with my yardstick. I've slain 7 with 1 blow, killed 2 giants, captured a unicorn, and trapped a wild boar. Do you think those fellows waiting outside my door could ever scare me?" Hearing this, the men freaked out and ran away. None of the king's men ever dared to try to do anything to him ever again, and the tailor reigned as king for the rest of his life. The end.
Wow. I mean, I could see why Walt was so adamant on cutting stuff out, because had they done a straight adaptation, this would have been probably a 3-hour short.
Would have been, first of all, far too long, and secondly, a mess. It's all over the place.
There were probably about 5 different points that I thought you were going to say the end, and you kept going, and it kept getting more nonsensical as you went.
Yep. That's what a lot of these older versions of the tales are like, where like you can tell that they're patched together from so many different people just telling different stories around a campfire and then just pulling bits and pieces from each other's stories that they liked and adding it on. But what's fascinating about this is that in this classic version of the tale, the tailor doesn't win much by being a brave little tailor. The fact that he's a tailor is not necessarily that relevant. What's relevant is that he's a trickster. He's surrounded by very gullible people, and he just keeps tricking all of them until he very dishonestly wins everything he wants.
Yeah.
And So I took a class on the Brothers Grimm fairy tales in college, and one of the assignments, like frequent assignments, was pick any of the stories and do a write-up that answers a certain set of questions. And one of them was like, how would you adapt this story? So I did Brave Little Tailor, and I'm like, I know that there's a Mickey Mouse adaptation, and it's good and all. But looking at this original story, this is a story about a trickster, and it actually makes more sense for Bugs Bunny than Mickey Mouse. This whole story is like it's Bugs Bunny style trickery to all of these characters who will fall for anything.
Yeah.
Or at least most of it is. You know, the business with the unicorn, I don't know. That does not need to be here. There's so much that doesn't need to be here. And yet, I think what you do get in the original story is a long time for a very small number of things. Like, we spent a very long time talking about Mickey explaining what already happened at the beginning of the cartoon and being wrong about it. Like, that is a significant percentage of the cartoon. It takes a very long time before he goes out and defeats the giant. And then there's no time for problem solving. He's just kind of in the thick of it. It's just preamble to the giant. The giant is destructive. Almost immediately he beats the giant. Like, you're getting very little in this story, as we see it in the cartoon, but it does work. Like, this is not what the original story is about. This is now about how, if you are very good at your job and, you know, remain true to the skills of your craft, then you as an artist can conquer anything. And that's just, it's a new thing. Like, this film is an original work entirely that just is like clearly started reading the original story and then just got way less interested the further it went along.
Yeah. They only made it about maybe a page and a half in, and that's all they needed.
And even then, they skipped the part that I also skipped at the very beginning, where right out of the gate, the first thing we see about the tailor is him messing with a woman who is selling him jam. Where, like, the flies come because he puts jam on toast, but first they have to establish that
where he got the jam
like,
from.
where he got the jam from, because like he made her get out all of the jam in her basket and then just picked one little jar, and then she had to put everything back, and she left very upset with him, and they want to establish that about it. They want to do the opposite of Save the Cat for this character and establish there's nothing valuable about this tailor, and there will not be from here on out.
I'm bewildered.
Good. That's exactly what I wanted. I'm very happy. I'm ready to start moving towards some closing thoughts here. Brave Little Tailor was a difficult cartoon to make given the complexity of its action. So, in its early stages of development, animator Jack Kinney had an idea for a new way to figure out the timing and staging of the film, the Leica reel. I'm not 100% on how to pronounce that, but I think that's how you say it. This basically turned the storyboard into test footage they could look at to see how the elements were coming together, which was particularly valuable for keeping Walt Disney's attention focused on the part of the story they were working on. Apparently, what had been happening was, whenever Walt looked at the storyboards, he was never looking where the staff wanted him to, and would just start changing everything without giving the animators attention to the thing that needed attention. So this was largely a means of just keeping Walt on track. The Directing at Disney book that I mentioned earlier says Leica reels were then relied on heavily for Snow White, Fantasia, and Pinocchio. So this was really moving the studio forward. Just sort of incidentally, this happened to be the cartoon that moved us forwards towards the principles we have now of animated movies basically being made several times before they're finished, in a way. This short did not succeed at revitalizing the popularity of Mickey Mouse, at least not that much, although I haven't found any evidence that it was unsuccessful. It seems like it was a reasonable success and would certainly become a huge part of their legacy. I mean, the Mickey Mouse documentary practically its opening credits sequence is built around Brave Little Tailor. So this would eventually become a huge deal. But at the time, the trio shorts, the cartoon starring Mickey, Donald, and Goofy from this time, they were a bit more popular. Mickey wouldn't really reclaim his status again as the top cartoon star until the Mickey Mouse Club came along in the mid-1950s. With that said, this film still had quite an impact on Mickey Mouse's legacy, because this cartoon marked the first time that Mickey had been cast as a character in a pre-existing story. In a sense, this kind of opened the door for the Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence in Fantasia, but much more than that. It opened the door for Mickey and the Beanstalk, that segment in Fun and Fancy Free, and Mickey's Christmas Carol. As it happens, Bill Roberts directed the Mickey and the Beanstalk sequence for Fun and Fancy Free, and that was the last time he worked on anything for Disney. In fact, it seems like that was the last thing he worked on in the animation business. After that, as Perry and Doctor put it in their book, quote, he disappeared from Disney history. I guess we'll never know the whole story of Bill Roberts, Mystery Man.
Just makes it sound like he was a fairy creature that just returned to the Fey realm.
Maybe that is I'd like to think that's exactly what happened. Do you have any final thoughts for us on any of this?
I mean, if nothing else, this was a really fun excuse to check out some old classic shorts that I haven't watched in a while. I really enjoyed watching the, I didn't write down the name. The
Mickey, the Story of a Mouse?
Yes, I really enjoyed that documentary. I was definitely expecting a fluff piece about Mickey Mouse.
Right.
But I think it was pretty fair, and it highlighted parts of Mickey's history that I know Disney likes to try and downplay.
Yeah.
I also really loved how it focused a lot on the perspective of the animators working at Disney. So if you are like me and you were kind of avoiding that documentary just because, again, you didn't think it was going to be anything else but praising Mickey Mouse, I'd recommend people check that out as well as checking out The Brave Little Tailor.
All right. Folks, it's about time for us to say so long, but before we do, we'll tell you where you can find us. Kristi, where should the people go to find you, your work, or anything you'd like to plug?
I am on most social media as KO Makes Things. I'm primarily on Instagram and Blue Sky these days, but I do also have a seldom used Facebook and Tumblr account.
What's your handle on whichever of those you'd prefer people go to?
Oh, it's all, I'm all KO Makes Things.
Okay.
On each one.
Perfect. You can follow this podcast on Facebook or Blue Sky at Stick to Shorts. You can find me on Blue Sky at JD11PC. You can read my writing about Muppets at toughpigs.com. where you'll also find my podcast, The Great Muppet Fandom Panel. Please be sure to give this podcast a review so more people can find us. And remember, the next time you try to have the tailor who married your daughter kidnapped in his sleep, stick to shorts.